Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of the Show Up Dad podcast. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, and I couldn't be more thrilled to introduce him to all of you. But first, let's take a moment to express our gratitude to our incredible sponsors, Tallman Equipment. They provide top-notch tools and equipment for the power line industry, ensuring that you have everything you need for your projects. Visit Tallman Equipment to explore their extensive catalog and discover how their reliable tools can assist you. I also want to give a heartfelt shout out to the Show Up Dad Foundation. This amazing organization is dedicated to supporting fathers on their journey towards becoming the best versions of themselves. Through their workshops, resources, and community, the Show Up Dad Foundation empowers dads to show up, be present, and make a positive impact on their children's lives. To learn more about their mission and how you can get involved, visit theshowupdadfoundation.org. Now let's turn our attention to our guest today, Pete DePrez. Pete truly is an extraordinary individual with a diverse background in law enforcement and a deep passion for helping others. His journey began in 2009 when he started his career in search and rescue for San Miguel County, showcasing his unwavering dedication to serving his community. In 2016, Pete made his transition to the Garfield County Sheriff's Office, where he took on various roles such as patrol, SWAT, field training officer, and firearms instructor. However, in 2020, Pete's life took an unexpected turn when he received a diagnosis of PTSD. This life-altering event led him to make the courageous decisions to leave law enforcement behind. But Pete's story doesn't end there, guys. Instead, he used the very methods he now teaches to heal his own injuries and embark on a new path. Today, Pete is not only an advocate for mental health and resilience, but also an inspiration to many. Through his experiences and insights, he shares valuable lessons on how to overcome adversity and thrive. So without further ado, welcome Pete to our show. Welcome to Show Up, brother.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I've been seeing your work, Pete, on Instagram, and it's fascinating. I know right now more than ever, men's mental health is a big topic. And we're also starting to see, too, that people are starting to talk about toxic masculinity and all these things. And I think these two things could possibly affect each other. You know what I'm saying? When we're not right mentally, it's going to affect all aspects of our life, whether it be our relationships, whether it be our work, whether it be with our own personal families and stuff like that. So thank you for joining us. And I just want to allow you to just share with our listeners about your personal experience with PTSD and how it's affected your life, brother.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. And kind of what we were talking about right before we started recording about what's largely addressed as generational trauma in the world of psychiatry, if you will. When we're talking about toxic masculinity, I think where that concept is coming from is very connected to the kind of framework of what we were discussing before, which is in the 3-4 generations that have come before ours, whether we're talking about our grandparents coming out of World War II, our parents coming through the Vietnam War generation, and now our generation experiencing GWAT and coming out of that. The difference between the healthy approach that is widely gaining steam and traction within the society as a whole versus what we have traditionally referred to and acknowledged as being more of a stoic, toxic masculinity approach. The difference between those two is very simply understanding more of the problem at hand now. And the problem at hand that we are facing, when I look at the medical definition of PTSD, it is someone who is traumatized from witnessing or experiencing traumatic events. I never felt traumatized by anything that I did as a first responder. My brain stopped working. And my personal story, if I'm looking at the totality of everything that went into my career ending in 2020 because of this diagnosis, it goes all the way back to when I was 18 months old. I was in a walker or a stroller, and my mom had stepped out of the room for a minute. I ran it into a dresser, standing dresser, and went headfirst into the dresser and knocked myself out cold. So
Mm-hmm.
my first head trauma was at 18 months old, but I grew up, I was born in 77, so that would have been 78-ish, 79. Going into the 80s and 90s, we had no concept of the long-term repercussions of head trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So I continued to accumulate this head trauma throughout my childhood and into my young adult and even adult years without any recognition of what could be the eventual consequences of this. So when I eventually entered the tactical world and suddenly I'm being exposed to large and small explosions and SWAT and short-barreled rifles and tight confines on regular basis, I noticed a substantial decline in my cognitive capacity. So all of a sudden, my short-term memory is disappearing. Problem-solving ability goes down the drain, and those are really important aspects to have control over as a cop. One of the things that we worry a lot about is getting details wrong within the scope of a call that are evidentiary. So if I'm misspeaking about how an event played out and I then write it down and dictate it in one way in my report, but then on the stand speak about it differently because I don't remember the events, I can Brady law myself, which ultimately is what it does not allow. If you get a Brady infraction, it prevents you from being able to testify in a case. So as far as
Mm-hmm.
from the judiciary standpoint, you are no longer relevant as a cop if you can't speak on behalf of your own arrests or testify on behalf of your own arrests. So
Mm-hmm.
on top of that, all the negative aspects started really accumulating. The anxiety became really overwhelming. My ability to sleep, which had started getting disturbed, I probably stopped sleeping, like really legitimately healthy, sleeping at a healthy level when I was 5 or 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So when I found alcohol at 15, it was this godsend that suddenly I had a substance that would allow me to sleep, or what I perceived as being sleep.
Yeah.
So I drank heavily throughout most of my 20s, through college and into up until I was 28, 29 years old. And then I quit drinking entirely throughout my career and didn't start again until this point where I was starting to get what I now recognize as being sick. And my sleep went down to no more than 20 minutes at a time. I probably averaged 2 to 4 hours of sleep throughout my career. And suddenly I can't sleep for more than 20 minutes at a time. So as a cop, I went to what everybody's utilizing anyway and just started drinking, which helped in
Yeah.
the immediate, but then I had some bad events happen that were outside of anybody's control, but a
Mm-hmm.
very old, close buddy of mine died and the wheels just fell off. And so before I knew it, I'm becoming unreliable at work. I'm not being proactive anymore. I'm being purely reactive. I would be assigned tasks from the SWAT team, uh, not in the midst of a call, but be assigned tasks like, hey, we need you to order this stuff. I'd completely forget to do that and therefore fall behind on my duties to that team. And by
Mm-hmm.
January of 2020, I had left the agency and was purely seeking answers as to what is this ailment that took me from a highly operational SWAT operator to now not being able to remember if I took a shower or not, and having to go into the
Mm-hmm.
bathroom and look in the tub to see if it's wet to even know if I had taken a shower.
Wow. So I can't even imagine how that felt, brother, because here you are, you're this, like you said, this high functioning individual. Now, because of what's happening to you, right? this loss of memory, all this different stuff, right? Being proactive or not being proactive anymore and being reactive, right? Now that's having a negative effect on how you feel about yourself, probably, right?
And well,
And
I had no, and this is something that a lot of you probably felt this on some level when you exited
Mhm.
the military, but I don't think most people in average day society have any way to truly conceptualize how much we take these roles on as a part of who we are. Um,
Mhm.
so civilians don't really taste that element of life where you have essentially um, given in to the concept that you are willing to sacrifice your life in the name of someone else's safety, whether that's the guys going overseas to do it or the first responders here domestically doing it for our local communities. And
Mhm.
when that is torn away from you from one of these invisible ailments, you're left with a huge lack of a sense of self. And
Mhm.
that's where the practices and the work that myself and so many others are preaching about becomes so valuable, because in this transition period where whether you're trying to heal a lot of the injuries that we're looking at from central nervous system dysfunction or the fallout of TBI, you have to reconfigure your sense of self and relearn what your purpose is. And you know, we don't talk
Mhm.
enough in society about purpose, but that was one of the Sebastian Junger wrote a book called Tribe. If you've ever read it, it's
Mhm.
fantastic. And he talks about that missing element in society where a lot of kids don't have this sense of purpose, and that the sense of purpose is essentially what gives us the motivation to um, move through life on a day-to-day schedule.
Yeah. Yeah, and you see that even with the older people that are elderly, once they stop work, what's usually what happens?
Absolutely.
They lost that sense of
Yep.
purpose and they go away. You know what I mean? For lack of better words. So yeah, purpose is definitely highly important. And I could see how having this traumatic post-traumatic stress disorder could be very, very significant, and impacting your life. It could also impact relationships too, right?
Unquestionably. Yeah.
How did it affect your relationships with loved ones, and how'd you navigate that?
Oh, that's a blended bag. I was married at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and we were already. I can look back now and recognize how much turmoil um, my marriage was subjected to in being
Mm-hmm.
uh, part of my life as a first responder, especially once I got into SWAT and my career in particularly, I was very focused on chasing meth and heroin, and then
Mm-hmm.
the highest level warrants that I could go after. So I wanted to be working the night shift. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I worked an entire year of nights at one point, so that's a year of not sleeping in the same bed as my then wife. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so incredible strain on the family unit, unquestionably. As I got sick, you have to keep in mind that I left the agency in January of 2020, and if we remember what was happening in January to March of 2020, that's when COVID was first
Yeah.
hitting. So my problems quickly became purely my problems. Everybody else in the world had a
Yeah.
full plate, so I was left to kind of navigate this space largely on my own. Not that I didn't have the support of my parents and siblings and everybody else, but
Mm-hmm.
they're all back in the Midwest. I was out here on my own, so unquestionably put a lot of strain on my family. But it was also I I take for granted how much more information is readily available now versus even then. So when I was asking this question, because my experience was I essentially got voluntold by the agency I was working for at the time, go figure this, go talk to a doc, do what you have to do to figure out what's going on. So I did what most people would do and went to my GP, and my GP quickly listened to what I was explaining and said, you're describing PTSD, which is very normal for somebody from your community. I'm going to prescribe you some medications, and I encourage you to seek talk therapy. And I remember asking him, well, how long will I do that? And he kind of scoffed and he said, you'll do that indefinitely. That to me did not present me with a protocol of treatment that was designed to towards resolve.
Yeah.
That was we're just going to keep masking this thing and hope it goes away. And there was unquestionably a part of me that was hoping I was just going to wake up one morning and feel better. But that inevitably was not happening. And so I wanted to get down. This is something that I think the military and first responder communities emphasize very strongly in our training is you need to understand the mechanical error that's taking place to really resolve and fix a problem. So whether that's a weapon system that we utilize on a regular basis, we're taught at a fundamental level how to break that weapon system down, figure out the malfunction, fix the malfunction, and then re-engage and get back in the fight. So that was the approach that I was taking from the get-go. I wanted to understand why my brain wasn't working the way that I was used to it working. What was the mechanical error that was taking place within my head that was suddenly taking me out of the fight? And I was introduced to a doctor who's a dear friend of mine now by the name of Dr. Kate Pate. She's on Instagram at Doc Pate. And she's a neurophysiologist who started tracking this problem to try to figure out what the answers were for the military community and the first responder community. She led me to Dr. Mark Gordon, who's a neuroendocrinologist who had first, to the best of my knowledge, he was one of the first doctors to correlate the TBI and endocrine dysfunction having similar symptoms to what has long been diagnosed as PTSD. The PTSD piece never fit into me. I always had issues sleeping, but it was not due to invasive thoughts or flashbacks of bad circumstances. It was, I was fixated on a tactical equation that I wanted to see if it could work or not. So I might be laying in bed for an hour thinking about, does this work when I'm pieing a corner before I enter a room under a dynamic situation? And I would get up out of bed and go down into the garage and play it out. Or I would hear a sound in the house in the middle of the night, and I would fixate on the sound and eventually get up and clear the whole house to make sure nobody was trying to break in downstairs. It felt and read very different than the literature that I was studying on PTSD. Now, I'm not qualified to determine if it is or is not PTSD, but what I found resolve in was treating it from the standpoint of TBI, endocrine and central nervous system dysfunction. And today I feel like I have a higher cognitive capacity than I ever have before. And that's come from just maintaining these practices and ensuring that I am doing the work to grow on a daily basis versus continuing to accrue the damage that had gotten me into that hole.
I think it's interesting that you said, Pete, that this is around 2020, right, when this all came to fruition, right? During that time, you're right, man. We had COVID going on. Everybody, I mean, the world literally stopped, right, for a lot of people. And we saw more divorces go up. We saw more depression go up. We saw children at a rapid
Alcoholism, drug
rate,
use.
alcoholism, all these crazy different things, right, that were happening. I even for myself, I had COVID, right? I've already had it like 4 or 5 times now, but that's one thing that I struggled with too, is the cognitive portion of that as well, and I don't know if that was just the stress of whatever was going on at the time, with COVID, with children, with everything else, you know what I'm saying? And maybe that was an indicator for me too with PTSD, because I don't know how many times I've bashed my head in. I wrestled since I was 6. I was in martial arts. I was in boxing, military explosions, even within the line industry, loud noises, cracks, pops, snaps, all these different things, loud trucks that can possibly play into post-traumatic stress disorder, right? We had talked beforehand, Pete, and we talked about how loud noises affect the tympanic, or what is it, the TM, or when we're talking about the how
Tinnitus.
loud noise, tinnitus. Yes, there we go. Yeah, can you touch base a little bit about that, because I thought that was pretty fascinating you're talking about.
Absolutely. And it so to couple it with what you were just talking about with the COVID,
Mm-hmm.
tinnitus, and as I understand it, tinnitus, which is ringing in the head, or often people will interpret it as being sound from the ears, but if you plug your ears, you're still going to hear it and feel it. It is an
Mm-hmm.
indicator of neural inflammation, so swelling of the brain, which often comes from TBI, hitting your head, loud noise. So when we are around short-barreled rifles, large and small explosions, anytime so when somebody's firing a weapon, the bang that we hear when that round is fired is not the gunpowder exploding or igniting. It's the projectile breaking the sound barrier. So that
Mm-hmm.
sonic blast is, it can penetrate bone, but it's absorbed by soft tissue. So our brains are taking those. And if we're in tight confines, which we're generally doing in SWAT and special operations, and we're firing these weapons, we're just eating every one of those blasts. It's the same with
Yeah.
flashbangs and large, big explosions, small explosions. With COVID is creating neural inflammation for whatever reason. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of the whys with
Yeah.
that, but it is creating neural inflammation. We know that from the cognitive fog that people talk about after or while whether it's during COVID or long COVID. And we see it so tinnitus becomes this gauge for me to know, am I getting sick? Generally, my tinnitus will be a little bit worse right before I start getting sick.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that inflammation is taking place. One of the easiest ways to address that is through diet and supplementation. There was a study done not too long ago looking at fried foods. And these are foods being fried in specifically seed oils, which is what you're going to get if you go to the vast majority of restaurants right now.
Yeah.
Those fried foods create 7 to 9 days worth of inflammation throughout the system. A single cigarette, I believe, creates something like 4 to 7 hours worth of inflammation throughout the system. So I don't want to suggest a cigarette is healthier than an order of French fries, but when we start to recognize how much we are doing to influence the inflammation throughout our system, and
Mm-hmm.
ultimately the effects of like tinnitus, we can start taking preventative steps to ensure that we are lowering that inflammation and then not being as affected by tinnitus. When I was sickest, my tinnitus sounded like a fax machine ringer going off in my head. It's just constant different pitches of high tones within my head, and it
Mm-hmm.
felt uncontrollable. it has gotten better the more work I put in, but that's also something that I can recall having as far back as I can remember. So 5, 6 years old was around the time that it's just what I thought quiet sounded like, until somebody pointed out to me that that's actually something called tinnitus. And Andrew Marr is somebody who has said in the past that he doesn't have tinnitus anymore. So it is something
Yeah.
that can be healed under the right circumstances, and by approaching it in the healthiest manner possible. But yeah, tinnitus is legit.
So you said diet supplementation, and I've seen that to be very, very true. My wife suffers from a chronic illness. She got Lyme disease, and that was one of the things that she has to deal with. It was inflammation, and she would get
Yeah.
tinnitus, right? And one of the ways that she was able to kind of help cure herself, she got tired of Western medicine failing her, was that she got into this program. She did the research. She got into the program called Annie Hopper, and it deals with neuroplasticity, and it deals with the brain waves and changing the way you think, and literally going back to where there was trauma and rethinking that trauma into a positive aspect, I guess. It's pretty fascinating, but she's been doing that since 2018 when she almost died, and until now. And she's seen significant increase in her health and lowering and managing chronic illness, pretty interesting. So
Women are, and I live in a bit of a bubble. I live in Colorado, in a ski town. This is the third ski town I've lived in now. Surrounded by some of the healthiest, most health conscious humans that I have known. The women in these communities are being just riddled with the Lyme, the thyroid, whether it's Hashimoto's or thyroid, and gluten intolerances. And it seems to be kind of a package deal where they're being affected by this. There are a number of ways to approach it. I don't know that the Lyme aspect, I believe, can be healed. It's a bacterial infection ultimately that has to be eradicated. But these are debilitating issues that are just, and it's amazing to me who it's attacking. Most of these women have never been on birth control. They have always been conscious of their diet. They have limited, as far as what they have willingly ingested. They don't have a ton of pollutants and the elements that we generally look at as being a need to eradicate to get somebody to a healthy level. They're already at a healthy level and they're still being affected by this. So it's a strange conundrum that needs to be way more focused on to eliminate. But the Lyme thing is an interesting conundrum, man.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, my wife, she's getting ready for her second marathon.
Yeah.
So she was running 10 miles a day. She was eating healthy. She was doing all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, she still remembers she had a tick on her. And from there, it was just downhill. And I mean, fast. She saw that in November and December, Christmas Eve. She got really sick. She couldn't feel from her waist down. She went into the hospital. They told her to go home. Nothing's wrong with you. She came back on the 25th back to the hospital. She was very frantic. Her limbic system was through the roof and her heart stopped, and they had to revive her. And that was very, very scary, for us, because there's nothing that they can do at that moment. You know what I mean? They're just telling us her heart's beating fine. All her symptoms are fine, but yet this is happening. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it was scary.
It's terrifying when, anytime. This is a story that I've heard over and over and over again, where one of these invisible ailments pops up in somebody's life and they go to try to get medical treatment, and there's no options for treating it because they can't even identify or determine what exactly is wrong. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons, especially in the military and first responder community, but also in society as a whole, as to why we have not addressed head on mental health issues as a whole earlier. When our dads were coming back from Vietnam, our grandfathers were coming back from World War II, we called it shell shock or battle fatigue or whatever the term might be. But they were essentially just functional alcoholics from that point on, and that's how they treated it. Now we happen to be living in a time where we can at least recognize the causation and kind of the mechanism of failure that's taking place that we can then fix and start getting people onto a road to better places. Ideally, we start training humans across the board to recognize their physiology at a younger age and recognize that anxiety is a perfectly normal thing to be feeling. Anxious is a normal thing, especially if you've been set. Like, there's a phenomenal account on Instagram called Physiology First. And it's a guy that works with teenage kids to recognize their physiology so that they don't start going to doctors with complaints about mental health issues and then get onto medications for ailments that that are perfectly normal. Teenage kids with hormones all over the place are going to feel a little anxious, especially when they're being asked to sit still for 8 hours and listen to lectures about stuff that they really don't care about. He's trying to introduce kids to hot and cold baths and breath work and exercise and outlets for a lot of these emotions that we oftentimes mask with pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, and I think that's great. Well, thank you for dropping that resource there, brother, because I see it even now with my teenage daughter. You know, she has anxiety towards her future. She graduates this year, and at first she didn't know what to do, and she'd just start breaking down crying, you know. And it took me being a father to recognize that, and through the prompting of my wife and through, you know, actually relying on the Holy Spirit to actually lead me instead of me getting offended by that and be like, what are you talking about? You should be happy you're graduating. You know what I mean? I was able to come to her in a loving approach, right? And be like, look, I understand what you're going through. I went through it too. I didn't have all the answers, but man, I'm here for you and we're going to help you to succeed. That little bit that she heard right there helped her out tremendously. It had more weight than anything else. You know what I mean? At that moment. So
that's good leadership.
Man, that's interesting that
part.
you said that. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, for sure. But it took that recognition, like you were talking about, right? Being able to recognize all that stuff, you know?
Yeah, it's perfectly, look, it is perfectly normal for somebody to feel anxious going into unknown circumstances, right? So how do we prepare them for that? It's like somebody getting worked up before a sports event. You're only as capable as what your training allows for. So if you were going to be anxious, you should have been anxious 6 months ago when you found out that you were going to enter this event, right? That was the time to train. Now the time's to go perform. Now, if you don't do well, you know what you have to work on next. But the consequence of, you got to allow people to fail forward. You have to allow them to feel all these things and not step in and intervene anytime somebody's uncomfortable. The discomfort is there for a reason. Lean into it, learn from it, embrace it, and do the work that you have to make it less uncomfortable.
I saw a post you said the other day, and I highly agree with this, man. Embrace the suck.
Embrace the suck, yeah.
And we have to, right? Because it's not going to feel comfortable at all. No one ever promised a life of comfort.
Absolutely. But I will say this. The concept of embracing the suck for a long, long time has, and we can look at this from the generational trauma thing. By not understanding the foundational elements of the problem, the resolve has been suck it up. If you just keep trying to pound your head into a wall over and over and over again, you're just going to have a sore head. You have to figure out the actual problem, embrace the work that it takes to resolve the problem, and then move on with your life. If you're just sucking the pain up, trauma. When I'm speaking to these communities, the military and first responder communities in particular, the second I say trauma, I see people shut down. And there's a legitimate reason why. Trauma has become this overused, incredibly saturated word that nobody even knows what the meaning is anymore. When I'm talking about trauma, I'm talking about something that's happened. This is Joe Dispenza's definition of mine. It is something that's happened in the past that's still affecting me today. So we can look at that from a bum ankle, right? I've rolled my right ankle more times than I can count. There's probably some structural damage in there. I can suck it up and just keep walking on that ankle, and eventually the ankle is going to deteriorate and fall apart, and I'm going to need surgery or whatnot. Or I can start addressing the injury, give it the time if it needs time to heal, and then start doing the PT and the extra work that it takes for that ankle to get back up to where it needs to be. Ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. We do the same thing with physical ailments that we do with emotional ailments. If we don't address a traumatic experience that happened within our life in a way that we acknowledge it, process it, come to a conclusion, and find some resolve with it, then we're just dragging it behind us for the rest of our lives. There are easy ways I won't say they're easy. There are ways that each of us individually can learn that will help us to process these events. I never felt like I had any issue dealing with dead bodies. Pretty regular thing when you're a first responder, you got to clean up dead bodies.
Yeah.
About 6 years into my career as a cop, one night we'd cleaned up a dead guy early in the morning, probably 5:15 in the morning. I was just excited because I was going to get home on time, be able to go to sleep at 6. I'm talking to the other deputy. This is after the coroner had collected the body and was gone. I'm talking to the other deputy down in the parking lot. And as I'm talking to him, his face looked gray and waxy and dead to me. In my head, I remember acknowledging it and thinking, oh shit, he looks dead right now. But I didn't think, oh, there's an error taking place in my brain right now. I just chalked it up to, that must be what happens when you see dead bodies all the time. So I went into the next day. Next morning, I'm talking to my ex-wife and stepson at the time. Their faces start looking that same way. I go into the office. I'm talking to my supervisor. His face is looking that way. And again, I'm not looking at it. I didn't take the time to go, hold on, something's going wrong with my brain. I just chalked it up to, this must be what happens when you're exposed to dead bodies all the time. So my point being, even if we don't feel like something is impacting us, there's often stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't recognize that is taking a toll on us. The brain does not recognize the difference between emotional and physical pain. It's releasing the same chemicals throughout our physiology regardless. So even if we don't acknowledge it, there's an impact. It is much easier to process this stuff, acknowledge it, and do the work that it takes to calm our physiology and neurology so that we stay healthy and active, and that's how we gain control. You know, whether we're talking about the line workers, where if you guys go up a pole, you have to control what's going on throughout that experience, from the time that you go up till the time you come down. If you're not in control of that stuff, bad stuff can happen. It's the same with first responders. If I run onto the scene of a bad, scary incident, I have to take control of that scene. Otherwise, I'm vulnerable. So we become obsessed with control, and we develop these kind of fantasies about what control actually is. The only way that we really gain control is by doing the work to ensure that we are as highly capable as we can possibly be. You do that by embracing the suck and doing the work.
I like that. I like that you said that. Yeah, because you're absolutely right. We focus on controlling everything that we can, right? But reality is we have to focus on the one thing we can control, which is ourselves, and being able to recognize these warning signs. I've heard another person put it this way, that it's like having warning signs on your car, right? You know, the check engine light comes on. If you keep ignoring those, eventually something bad's going to happen, right?
Yes.
And that's exactly what you're describing. You had these warning signs, and it's subtle, and you have to pay attention to the details, right? It's something that we learn as first responders, as linemen, as military people, pay attention to the details, right? That's something I
Yes.
preach even at the apprenticeship, right? And it's taking that aspect of that training and utilizing even our own mental health. Pay attention to the small little details, because they're going to let you know that something's happening.
Yeah.
You know?
And those little details are the symptoms. So
Yeah.
if you're not sleeping, if you are not physically capable of sleeping, you
Mhm.
are showing signs that your central nervous system is not functioning optimally. If you are constantly irritable, which, if I would say there are two consistent qualities that most first responders exhibit. It is insomnia and irritability. Those are two
Mhm.
symptoms of central nervous system dysfunction, and oftentimes TBI, the fallout from TBI. Most people will look at the context or the TBIs as being loss of consciousness. There are
Mhm.
micro and macro concussions. A macro concussion being a loss of consciousness and open skull fracture, something along those lines. A micro concussion is anytime you're seeing stars. Maybe you feel a little dizzy, change of colors, see a flash of light when you hit your head. That's a micro
Mhm.
concussion. Most people, when they experience a macro concussion, will then take preventative steps to ensure that they don't accrue more of those macro concussions. We don't do the same preventative steps with micro concussions, so we tend to continue to accumulate those, and they stack up with time. So it doesn't have to do purely with the extent of damage that you have incurred throughout your career. You have to look at it over the span of your entire life. And it doesn't
Mhm.
mean you're disqualified from doing this, Joe. It just means that you need to start taking steps to address it. A lot of that can be done through diet, exercise, behavioral intervention, and actionable steps that you perform on a daily basis. But that takes investment from an individual.
Yeah. How would you address, or how, like, what advice do you have, Pete, for those who are hesitant to reach out for help? Because I know for men, we've been taught for so long, suck it up, buttercup, rub some dirt on it.
Well, and that's what I was trying to get to earlier, and I got sidetracked. So I think a lot of where that comes from is
Mhm.
not having an understanding of what can be done. When we don't have any means of resolve for a problem, that's when we get these options like, well, just suck it up. Just keep going. And under certain circumstances, that's absolutely necessary. In a survival situation, you got to suck it up and get through. And a lot of times it feels that way when we are in these life situations and dealing with whether it's PTSD or other mental health ailments. The course of action is pretty simple. One, start breathing. Recognize
Mhm.
that breath work, anybody who, I have heard people say, I don't believe in breath work. I would then encourage them to do 60 seconds of the fastest, shortest breathing that they can, and then tell me how they're feeling. They're going to feel highly agitated, excited, and likely like they're hyperventilating, right? So
Yeah.
we then know, we've shown that it works. You can create a sense of panic within yourself. On the flip side, you can also do slow, steady, focused breathing to downregulate and bring yourself to a calmer state. So I'm not sure if you guys utilize any of this in your specific training, but within the scope of law enforcement, when we are teaching distance shooting in particularly, we're teaching, you're doing a slow squeeze through the trigger at the bottom of your third or fourth breath. The reason we teach it at the bottom is because that's when you are physiologically the most relaxed in that sequence of breaths. So we're already teaching breath work. Anybody that does jujitsu, if they've gotten past white belt, has begun on some level to focus on their breath. It's one of the first things in jujitsu that I listen to is how is this other person that I'm competing against breathing? Because if they're panic breathing, I'm just going to lay on them until they get exhausted and then have my way with them. Your breath controls a ton of your physiology. So utilizing that to down regulate at the end of the day or the end of a shift is wildly important. It's one of my favorite trainers who I have a ton of respect for, takes his clients through these pretty intense, focused workouts. And he's very conscious of every minute of working time that he has with the client. It's their money, it's their time. They're paying him to do this. But at the end of the workout, the last 5 or 10 minutes of every workout, he has them laying on their back with their feet elevated on the wall, just breathing. And I asked him one day, why do you do that? And he said, because I just jacked up their central nervous system with this workout, and now I want to bring them back to a place of quiet and rest and calm. Like these are tools that are just naturally inherently in our tool bag. We've just forgotten how to utilize them. So to answer your question, it would be figuring out a breathwork routine. And there are a ton of fantastic organizations out doing a lot of really valuable scientific-based work in this area. HHP, Health and Human Performance Foundation, is a fantastic one. Shift Adapt, one of my closest, dearest friends, Emily Hightower, works there. Kate Pate, who I mentioned before, puts out a ton of great information on this stuff. So figure out what kind of tutelage you want with the breath work and start focusing on that, because it goes a tremendously long way. Diet, supplementation, making sure that you're getting vitamin D3, fish oils, krill oils, magnesium, zinc. Magnesium threonate is a fantastic supplement to help people get to sleep. Valerian root would be something that will help somebody stay asleep. But we want to be taking these steps with intent. So when I'm doing breath work, I want to be doing it with the intent of calm, right? Like lowering my level of excitement throughout my system. When I'm doing my supplementation in my diet, I want to be eating as clean as I possibly can. Processed foods, foods with a bunch of hormones and chemicals in them are disrupting not just the inflammation throughout your system, but also your endocrine system, a number of other negative, detrimental aspects that these processed foods and hormones are affecting. Even the fluoridized water. We don't know how much fluoride ultimately contributes to a lot of these negative attributes, but we know it's a neurotoxin and that it should be limited at best, but try to drink filtered, clean water. Those type of behavioral practices go a really, really long way. 30 seconds of cold water at the end of your hot shower every day goes a tremendously long way. There are physiological benefits, but it's also introducing that discomfort into your life and accepting it as being a benefit goes a really long way at just setting tempo for this stuff in your life on a daily routine. Journaling, I can't say enough about the benefits of journaling. You are developing a relationship with your own internal dialogue. Without that, we find people, and I have these conversations regularly where somebody calls me, they're hysterical, they are crying, and these are knuckle draggers, right? These are tough, bad dudes. They're falling apart. And I ask them what's wrong. Same response every time. I don't know. This is how you start to figure out what's wrong. You start developing a relationship with your own internal dialogue. So when you have these moments, you can explain, because I can't get into your head and determine what's wrong in that moment. You have to figure that out and let me know, and then we can generally fix it. But until you can articulate what the problem is, we can't resolve it. So developing that relationship with your own internal dialogue, if you have any level of cognitive impairment from TBI, utilizing journaling to track your progress or lack thereof on a daily basis is invaluable. Mm-hmm. All of these tools accumulate with time and add up to where you don't have to utilize them with as much regularity as you did initially. But to start, it's like the opposite of an elimination diet. We want to introduce all these practices, start getting people utilizing them, figure out which ones are the biggest benefits to them. You know, it's kind of like exercise. If I take somebody in and I'm going to start training them in the gym, I don't know what they're going to react best to. So we're going to try a variety of different things, and then we're going to narrow it down to what they benefit from the most. If I go in and I just hammer them on heavy squats the first day, they're going to be so sore the next day, they're never going to want to come back to the gym. So we have to introduce this stuff in a way that feels welcoming and inviting, and they slowly start determining what's most effective for their lifestyle, their discipline, and their healing journey.
I like what you said about journaling. When you're doing that and you're writing it out, right? And you look back and you go back to your journal, what you put at that day, right? Because your long-term memory, I know if it's anything like mine, I can't remember yesterday, you know what I'm saying? But when you write it out, you put it out, it's before you see it, and you're able to start making decisions. And another part of what you're talking about is self-educating. I mean, you gave so many resources, Pete, for our listeners that are out there, right? And it was you doing your part and going out there and start advocating for yourself. I think that's one of the big things that men don't do. We don't know how to advocate for ourselves until it's too late, right? We're being reactive instead of proactive. One of the biggest scares that I have right now is that our industry is pushing military. Welcome you into our community, right? And I agree, because it is a lot like the military, the way our structure is and stuff like that. And we would love to have military people come in and work within our industry, right? They're hardworking. There's a lot of stuff that we could take from the military. The problem I'm seeing, though, is when you're not addressing these PTSDs, the line trade, like a lot of first responders, has the uncanny ability to magnify problems you don't know even existed. So when you're coming with already PTSD from your whole lifespan, like we've talked about it, right? And then plus being even being magnified through military or law enforcement, stuff like that. And when you come into the line industry, now guess what? That's going to be magnified even more, and you have to deal with it. Right now, we've had a lot of people that are committing suicide. You know, a lot of men that are reaching out. And I fear that number is going to grow even more, especially now with all the influencers out there that are pushing, hey, man, you got out of the military, come to the line trade. This is where we want you. We want you over here. You know what I mean? And that, to me, that's scary, brother.
Well, but we have to ask, why are they getting to this point that they feel like they can't tolerate the pain any longer, right? I will never be, and I feel like the first responder community in particular has a very strong prejudice about suicide as a whole. I certainly did. I got sick of cleaning up suicides. I had the same resentment and kind of blatant prejudice about it. It was that it's a selfish act, and how could anybody do this to themselves and the people that they love? After being and experiencing that level of darkness and recognizing, I know that I cannot maintain this level of pain indefinitely. I have to find a way to resolve this pain. I feel like a lot of people, most people that take that ultimate step, they've reached their threshold for pain. We have to get the message out that there are ways that pain is temporary. If you take the steps to heal the injury and the cause of the pain, you will find resolve, and you'll find a better life, a happier life, a healthier life. But most people don't understand that there is a path to that resolve. A big reason for that is because for millennia, there hasn't been a path for resolve. In the last 60 years or 40 years, it has been pharmaceutical meds and talk therapy, and that doesn't offer resolve necessarily. Now, those medications were not designed for long time prolonged use. They were designed as a bridge, and if they were utilized in the way that they were designed for, like, we're going to give you this antidepressant for 6 weeks. In that 6 weeks or 12 weeks, whatever it might be, we want you doing breath work. We want to address your diet. We want to look at your gut microbiome. What are you taking probiotics wise? We want to look at how much exercise you're getting. When we start implementing practices and actionable tools that can be utilized on a daily basis, they won't have the need for that antidepressant at the end of that journey, because they will actually be addressing ways to heal the injury that they were medicating for in that period of time. So recognizing that there are ways to resolve this, and it's not going to be continuing to rely on booze or drugs or pharmaceuticals, but legitimate resolve. That will go a really, really long way to stopping a lot of that action.
Well, brother, once again, it's been an amazing time, dude, just talking to you and just hearing all your words of wisdom, brother, and just sharing about post-traumatic stress disorder, and then also giving our audience hope. That's what this podcast is for, is to bring hope to those who are struggling.
Absolutely.
Right? So we thank you. And I just want to give this opportunity for you to just share how people can reach out to you, get a hold of you. Please do so, brother.
Absolutely. We're on Instagram at ASM Foundation. So that's Adam, Sam, Mary, ASM Foundation. Website is the same, www.asmfoundation.com. All the information that you need as far as what we do and what we offer and ways to reach out and contact us is there. We work primarily with first responders and veterans within this space, but I am open and willing to work with anybody that is experiencing these problems and needs help. If I can't help you directly, I promise you I can get you to somebody that can. This is the umbrella for who this work will work for is very, very broad. Anybody that is exposed to prolonged stress, sleep deprivation, and trauma will benefit from this work. So reach out, ask for help, do what you got to do to get to tomorrow, because I promise you there are better days ahead. We'll keep cranking out content and trying to make it relevant and keep moving forward.
Well, once again, brother, thank you so much for coming on here and just sharing what you do, man. We'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks for having me.